I'd known it was a costume interview, I would have worn a costume.
Would they always go all out? It doesn't matter who we're interviewing in terms of cult musical stars or writers, etc. They go all out. Renee and Hades always, or Mary and Hades always go all out. And so they made an effort today to dress as Mary.
Excellent.
Who's your character from Rock and Roll?
It's Dizzy. So, Dizzy and Stretch. Was
Yeah.
it shrew? Or is he a
Pardon?
rat? Was Dizzy a rat or was he a shrew?
No, they were drats. So
Oh,
the
it's just kind of like a rodent.
yeah, so it was
Okay,
basically, post-apocalyptic,
Exactly.
half rodent, half person.
gotcha.
Uh,
Okay.
you know, and that was the original title for rock and roll was Drats,
Oh, wow.
Drats.
But besides rock and roll, which we'll dote upon, we just want to say we were talking before you came on of how much Nelvana meant to us growing up. It really was for all of us who grew up in the 90s. Nelvana was a huge part of our childhood. And the properties of Nelvana meant a lot to us.
Great.
And just there's so many, innumerable of how many properties of Nelvana there are that really meant a lot to all three of us who grew up in the 90s. They're just such we have such nostalgia for it and such a warm place in our heart for Nirvana and all the properties and everything that Nelvana represents, which is traditional animation and
Yeah.
original animated properties. So, Mary and Hades, do you have any, before we talk about rock and roll, do you have any warm memories about Nelvana growing up in the 90s and the properties from Nelvana?
I was turned for Care Bears. I loved Care Bears. I loved Strawberry Shortcake, Expector Gadget. Um, God. Oh, and there was My Pet Monster. That's true. That's that one too. That was like the 80s ones. Those ones have a special place in my heart. And the Berenstain Bears, of course.
What
But
about
I,
Roly
oh,
Poly Oly?
I, I'm sorry, what?
What about Roly Poly Oly?
Oh my gosh, yes.
That one I didn't actually watch. That one wasn't on my radar.
Shocking. Shocking.
Oh no. I had the early one. Oh.
Eek the cat.
Um, yeah. I always a huge fan. Magic School Bus,
Yep.
like top tier. Always like my kids are obsessed with Magic School Bus. To this day, like new one and old, they have specific like they're like, I want the new one. No, but I want the old one, this specific, they know exactly like and they love that kind of animation to this day.
Great.
My favorite was always Magic School Bus and Beetlejuice, like
Oh,
I loved all of those. Ah,
Yeah.
it's all so nostalgic and like so close to our hearts.
Beetlejuice, I forgot. I love that one.
I remember, I don't know, this is a very niche one, but I remember the Nelvana logo coming on before or after the properties. And I loved the polar bear and the stars in the sky. And I loved Blazing Dragons and
Yep.
then Dinosaurs and Cadillacs. And I loved Beetlejuice, the animated series. I mean, there's just so many properties from Nelvana that just meant so much to 90s kids and to 80s kids. And so we just admire you and your work
Well,
so
thank you.
much.
That's one of the fun things about having written the memoir and speaking to lots of people about it is really meeting people who grew up with the shows and who it meant a lot to. I'll share a quick funny story and then we should focus on our interview. Um, I was doing an interview with somebody doing a podcast and their day job was teaching dance. And they said if people came in to learn dance and felt they couldn't dance, like they were being pushed into it by a partner who wanted them to dance and they couldn't dance, he would always teach them how to dance by playing the Care Bear Countdown. Because anybody can dance to the Care Bear Countdown was the motto. And
Oh, I love the Care Bear movies. They're so 80s. They're
yeah,
so 80s in terms of the thing I love about 80s cartoons, which are a lot of the cartoons our niche are musicals, cult musicals, which rock and roll is a huge cult musical. But the thing that I love about 80s fantasy properties is that although they're very beautiful and colorful and bright, there's a darkness to them in terms of their themes and in terms of the battle between good versus evil that I think a lot of that juxtaposition is missing nowadays in animated properties. So that's what I really loved about 80s animated films and animated 80s animated TV series is that they never shied away from the darker parts of reality and life, but good always triumphed over evil, which
Right.
even the Care Bear movie had a bit of a darkness to it, which I loved.
Yes, absolutely. And that was, I think, part of its success, right? It was that sort of inevitable battle.
Since you're just an aficionado of animated films, what got you into animation?
So, a couple of things. When I was growing up, if somebody had asked me at, say, 5 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have answered, I want to either grow up to become Superman or Mickey Mouse. And I saw a lot of cartoons as shorts in movie theaters because when I was growing up, they were theatrical shorts and they were in front of movies for the whole audience, right? So Bugs Bunny shorts, Daffy Duck shorts, even Mickey Mouse shorts, and uh, and then Superman, because I read the comics and the Superman TV show was on television, and those were my aspirations. I didn't have what it took to become Superman. So aiming to be Mickey Mouse was an easier sort of shot.
Mighty Mouse.
Liked Mickey Mouse, but
So,
the what really got me into animation though as an adult was a friend. I was doing experimental films. I began my career doing experimental films. Uh, I did a feature film called Voulez-vous coucher avec God, which had a little bit of music. The star was a guy named Tuli Kupferberg, who was with a group called the Fugs, Fugs, and they were an interesting anarchistic band in the 60s and 70s. And so I had a friend who had made plasticine animation working with Jim Henson's company.
oh,
And he had moved to Toronto and he was running the commercials division of a company. And Henson reached out to him as he was starting Sesame Street, wanting to have him do 5 shorts using plasticine animation. And so he said he didn't have the time to do it, but could I put a crew together? And I used my crew of friends who I made films with. And he trained us on how to do plasticine animation. And we did 5 letters for the first season of Sesame Street. And shockingly, 3 of those are still on like YouTube, which is the amazing thing about YouTube is it's where old shorts go to die, but they never die because they're there. So essentially, that got me into animation, and animation is really what took off for Nelvana as we started Nelvana, because it was just around the time that we were leaving college and wanting to start our own business. And I was doing this in Toronto, Canada, and there was no industry here. And even in the US, the industry had sort of shrunk to the point where 2 companies really dominated American television animation. One was Hanna-Barbera and one was Filmation.
Filmation.
Yep. And so we basically decided that we would start our company, Nelvana, and do animation and live action and everything else. But animation is what really took off and put us on the map.
It's interesting that you said that because before you came on, we were talking about Nelvana and Deke and Filmation, and we feel like they had such originality that at that point in the 80s and 90s, we consider them, along with filmmakers like Don Bluth, to be the antithesis of Disney. Because as much as we love Disney, Disney's quite constricted and boxed in terms of their originality and what they're allowed to do. And so your properties and properties from other animation studios during that time were really groundbreaking and original because they started from just pure imagination. There was no preconceived ideas or preconceived expectations from a company telling you what to do. I'm sure that's not true all the time, but the reason I think your properties and properties from other animation studios at that time are so beloved is because they were so original in terms of what was happening around in terms of other animation studios. So I think it's pretty great that you came in at a time where uh, other animation studios had set up to sort of take on the unoriginality of other big studios, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but what we were driven on was not only, doing original projects, which we started with, but we were also focused on quality because what had happened
Mm.
is the quality that was being done for TV had just got to be less and less and less. And to the point where there was almost no animation in a show. It was just, gag writing. And we decided that in order to break out, particularly, with our location in Canada where there was no industry and we weren't part of the mainstream industry, that quality would be what would break us into the global industry, particularly the US industry. And that's what happened. We had a short, we did a television holiday special called Cosmic Christmas, which had original music by Sylvia Tyson, who was a folk singer with Ian Tyson. It was Ian and Sylvia. And George Lucas saw it and picked us to do the first Star Wars cartoon for his holiday special, The Faithful One.
Yes. Which is something else.
That was a
Listen,
special.
I unironically love the holiday special. Okay, like I love it, love it. Like it's so much. It's a party movie. You have a party around the movie, and every so often you tune in, especially to the animated parts, and just be like, "Look, look, look, look! It's so good!" And then you continue the party. I love the holiday special.
And
Yeah,
then B. Arthur appears as Maud in space.
Amazing. Yeah, it
yeah.
has moments of absolute beauty.
I don't want to assume, but did Nelvana also work with the Ewoks cartoon?
Yeah, we produced Ewoks and droids. So we worked with Taj Mahal, the singer on the theme song of that and the show. We produced the show. And we produced droids with music by God, Stuart Copeland from The Police.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because George Lucas at the time was living with Linda Ronstadt. They were a couple. And so that gave him entree into a whole music world, right?
During the 80s and the 90s, in terms of where your ideas come from, did you all get ideas from, um, I guess, artists pitching their ideas to you? Or did you have a hand in some of the creativity and originality of some of the properties that were coming out during that time?
So we started off just doing our own original ideas, sometimes inspired by other stories. So we did a version of the Devil and Daniel Webster, which we called the Devil and Daniel Mouse, and we had John Sebastian, the singer, songwriter of Loving Spoonful, who did the music for that. And then we did Romeo and Juliet, two robots who fall in love, based on Shakespeare's story. And that had more music by John Sebastian. We did one show where we had Rick Danko of the band do the music called, let's see, what did Rick do? Um, I think it was Take Me Up to the Ball Game, which was baseball in outer space. So we had a lot of sci-fi oriented shows that we did. And we basically, when we did Rock and Rule, that was an original project as well. And but Rock and Rule, we've sunk a lot of money into Rock and Rock and Rule, while it's a cult favorite, wasn't a box office favorite and didn't get a wide release. So yes, too bad. But it put us in debt, so we had to work our way out of debt. So that's when we started to work with more of other people's ideas. So we did Inspector Gadget with Deke
Ah,
co-producing it.
which was
And
so iconic.
yeah, and then we did that's when we got into the Care Bears and Strawberry Shortcake to work our way out of debt. And over time, we did a lot of original ideas and we did a lot of properties. We did Tales from the Crypt Keeper as a Saturday morning
I
series.
loved that animated series.
That
And as you mentioned, we did Beetlejuice with Tim Burton. That was a great show to work on, and Danny Elfman's music was fabulous. But I know you want to talk about rock and roll, so
Oh, we just wanted to connect this all together because I think there's a common thread that runs through all of your properties and rock and roll as well, which is originality and creativity. And the reason why Nelvana meant so much to me and meant so much to other children in the 80s and the 90s is because they were producing properties that were so original and so creative. And I think that's why they resonated with us at that age. And still, I mean, Blazing Dragons, which I loved, I still remember it coming on at night on the Disney Channel.
okay. And that was created by Terry Jones of Monty Python.
Oh my God. You guys have got to see that television series. If you haven't seen Blazing Dragons, it's so camp and it's so British humor. It's
Yeah.
so great. I love it so much. But what I was going to say is, you produce these Care Bears, Inspector Gadget, Strawberry Shortcake, which are iconic properties, and they have become cult favorites themselves. But rock and roll, for all intents and purposes, in terms of I know the history of it. It means a lot to people, and I'm so glad that it's finally getting just due and just recognition because it's an incredible, probably one of the most original animated cult musicals of all time. And I think it sits perfectly on the shelf with other animated cult musicals like The Last Unicorn and Heavy Metal. I think it fits perfectly with those other animated musicals. What do y'all think?
Oh,
I do.
absolutely. I love all the music in it, and like the animation in rock and roll is just an absolute visual feast. Like there is so many things you could pause it in any moment, and like especially during that nightclub scene, you could see like entire stories anywhere where you pause it, like when they're just going through the crowd, you see like different people dancing. It's like trippy, it's fun. And then they're sitting there like looking around over this table, and then you could see someone has partied here. They partied hard, and it's and I'm like, this is so great. Like I love watching like the nightclub scene and everything, and like you just see all these little tiny little details that you don't see in modern day animation these days. Like everything's so smooth and perfect. Like I love like the cool transitions and stuff like in between scenes. It's so good.
We're animation and animated film and animated TV series aficionados, so we
Yeah.
appreciate the art that goes into it.
Well, you were the people we made it for, and you found it. Like,
Mary, what about you?
I love it's that animation gets me. There is a certain like bouncy, maybe it's a frames per second thing, but there's like a bouncy element that I even like incorporated into like my acting later on to do camp stuff because there's so much like movement with it. You know what I mean? Then you get like, for instance, like Hanna-Barbera, it was very like straight, you know what I mean? But then you go to like the Nelvana type and you have like a flow and a bounce. And it's something very aesthetic, kind of like the Don Bluth got it too. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, you know what I mean? But it,
well, one of the
I,
things that probably,
I
I'm sorry, what were you saying? I didn't mean to cut you off. What were you going to finish?
oh, I was just talking about the animation style itself, and I really
What
miss
I
that 2D.
So what I was going to say is that one of the things that contributed to that was Clive Smith, who was one of my partners in founding Nelvana and who was the director of rock and roll, was a musician, had been in a few funky British bands, one called I can't remember. He was with Arthur Brown, who's the singer who would set himself on fire before he went on stage, singing a song. His hit song was called Fire, right? And then he was with this British band that was the Bonzo Dog Band, or I've got the name slightly wrong, but it was a cult band in the UK around that time of, the British invasion.
But it's so gritty. And besides rock and roll being an incredible musical, I think adult animated films are so underappreciated. So when you think about the medium of animated films and animated properties and animated television series, there's a misconception that animated films are strictly for children. And what I love about rock and roll and its ilk of adult animated films is that it takes a childlike property or childlike medium and tells real earthy, um, sort of harrowing stories. And that's why I think rock and roll fits on the shelf, like I said, with The Last Unicorn and Heavy Metal and Ralph Bakshi's works and Cool World and those types of adult anime. There is now that Mary says it, there is something about your work that seems like the characters, the way in their movements and the way that they sing and the way they act and the way they move their limbs, it looks like as if the animator was looking at a model actually doing that. And then it's almost as if they sort of painted over or drew over someone's real actions. I think that's the lifelike quality that Mary was alluding to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but basically it was done in classical animation, so there was no rotoscope. Which Ralph Bakshi was doing rotoscope at the time, right? He would shoot live actors and then trace them. A lot of his early films were like that, and his Lord of the Rings was like that. It was interesting. It was early to do that, and even now it's still early to do that. But no, we did it classically. We had some great animators who would basically, act out in front of a mirror what they wanted to do, and then you know, they would animate what they saw. Um, and that was the classic way that Disney did it. And we brought in a number of Disney's nine old men who, were the backbone of that animation studio to sort of help our animators, sort of be the best. And we had a lot of great animators. So Robin Budd, who did Mock, John Celestri, who did the Sheriff, Anne Marie Bardell, who did Angel. They were all really great animators, and we were able to cast the animators, to a character.
Oh,
That's how we
cool.
did the music, by the way. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but we had, Debbie Harry wrote the music for the female heroine, Angel. Cheap Trick wrote the music for Omar, the sort of punk band leader. Earth, Wind, and Fire wrote the disco music, which kind of made sense. We had Lou Reed write Mock's music, and we had Iggy Pop write the music for The Demon. And, so instead of having one composer, we had multiple composers, each writing for their part. And that, I think, ended up with a very unique kind of sound that no one's ever replicated, because it's all these different artists writing their parts and then the production company melding it together with a composer whose job it was to weave it all together.
It works. It works. It works. It works. That may be disparate, but it works and it's so cohesive along the lines of heavy metal that had music written by Stevie Nicks and Don Feder and all these different bands, Blue Oyster Cult,
That
etc.
was, yeah, so heavy metal, though, I think was, what's the word for it? Needle drop. So they took existing tracks that maybe hadn't
Ah,
and then put it to the show.
Mhm.
That's a different approach. So
I
this really
wanted
was,
to
yeah,
sorry, I
we
wanted
were,
to ask you in terms of like your properties at the time. I feel like rock and roll is even a different and more experimental than the other things that your production company was doing at the time. Did you really want to experiment and do something completely different?
I think I mentioned I started as an experimental filmmaker, and Patrick
Hmm.
made films with me in that period. So the two of us came from that background of independent experimental film. Clive came out of the animation business. He had worked on the Beatles cartoon. There was a Saturday morning show with the Beatles. He worked on the Lone Ranger cartoon series in England before coming to Canada. And we kept on that experimental aspect through our whole, existence and careers. So when we did Beetlejuice, we had a minute of computer animation way before computer animation was prevalent, that was built into the show. The commercials that were done were, using CGI. And we did shows like Pelswick with John Callahan, was a quadriplegic cartoonist in newspapers.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and Pelswick was the first kid in a wheelchair who was the lead of a cartoon series. But we were always looking for things to do that were edgy. We were always looking for different medium to work with and ways to, keep what we did alive and fresh. And the same thing with music. We worked with the Bare Naked Ladies as well as, all these other people we've talked about. We worked with, going back, it's not experimental, but we worked with Ronnie Spector for the cartoon we did for Roseanne Barr.
Oh yeah.
We were always, I think, adventurous in working with talent that was interesting and exciting.
I okay, I'm not gonna hog the time. I just want there's two things that popped to my head when you were talking I'm really interested in. Mary and Hades, do you have any points that you wanna ask Michael about anything that he brought up? Because I have two things in my head that are stewing.
Oh, go.
I have to look it up. You go.
No, go ahead, Mary.
All right. I mean, I thought it was a really cool thing to touch on the power of frequency and singing and vibration and like bardics and how that could either affect divinity or evil, and that's how you bring up the creature from the Hellmouth. And that was like really, because that's a whole weird spiritual thing. So like that was really progressive, and I really liked that account of it because I was like, oh yeah, all right, yeah, I can get behind that. I know I made some notes here, but the evil bardics really got it. But my favorite part honestly was the end. It like makes the hair stand up on me. It gives me like chills when she starts singing that song
Yeah.
to put the beast back. And I'm just like, oh, this is so magical. Because, yeah, it is that 80s. Our enemy is evil and not capitalism yet. So we're going to fight evil. And it's still, every time I watch it, as soon as that beautiful song starts, and I love that song, I think about that song sometimes. As soon as that song starts, I'm just like, yeah, no matter how many times I've seen it. But the music and the animation right before it, when the Iggy Pop song, when all the creatures are coming up and how he's like this amalgamation of like things, it's just morphing and undulating into different creatures, and there's cats yelling, and I'm just like, damn. The ending is cool. That's my favorite.
That Debbie Harry song was great. She was terrific to work with. They were all terrific to work with. Everybody nailed their songs very quickly. And I thought she really nailed it for a song that basically has to sort of make the ending work.
Yeah,
It's so beautiful.
it's a beautiful song. I think about it sometimes. I do.
Oh, what will the signal be? Hades?
Yeah, so in Rock and Rule, one of my biggest questions was it went to the mock went to Lou Reed. But and like there's a lot in the animation that is just it reminds me of Frankenfurter.
Yeah.
And James had mentioned in the chat earlier that it might have gone to Tim Curry, or who was the other person you had mentioned?
Mick Jagger?
Mick Jagger or Tim Curry?
It could be
What
lore
can you
people. It
give
could
us a little
be
bit of
rock
the
and roll lore.
backstory behind that?
So we did approach Mick Jagger, but didn't get very far with him. We had David Bowie seriously interested, but then in the end decided it didn't work for him. And then we went to Lou Reed. We could have gone to Lou Reed first because Lou was kind of like inspirational for all of them, right?
Mhm.
And so, and he was perfect. And he when I met with Lou to go over the project and how it would work, I had mentioned that Clive would go to the recording session and be there to talk him through, how the animation would work. And Lou's face, muscle by muscle on his face, rippled. And he went from a happy Lou Reed to a demonic Lou Reed. He became mock in front of me. And his face was tortured. And he spit out the words because he could barely say them anymore now that his muscles were all contorted. It was like he was cramping in his face. Um, he said, if you want to see your partner Clive alive again, you won't send him to the studio, because if you do, I'll cut him up into little pieces and send him back to you in a box.
Yeah.
So I quickly said, well, Lou, he doesn't have to go to the session, but we'll have him available by phone so he can answer any of your questions. And then at the end of it, after recording it, Lou Reed said to me, we should have had Clive at the session. But when I thought about it afterwards, what I realized was he had fought hard to keep executives out of his recording studio sessions. And so he had kind of forgot that we were his creative partners and we weren't the suits, right? So it was just kind of interesting. So that was a fun moment. But they all got into their parts tremendously. Like, Iggy Pop, you know, loved being the demon.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. In the beginning, we had a hard time nailing the first artist, and the first artist we nailed was Debbie. And she was very excited to do it. And then everybody wanted to do it because she was doing it. So Lou Reed wanted to work with her, Iggy Pop wanted to work with her,
Yeah. And the voice acting was phenomenal. Like for Mock especially, Lou Reed hit it out of the park. Fantastic. Like he was perfect for the character.
I was going
Loved
to
it.
say is there's something very endearing, but also very terrifying about the way Lou Reed sings, Take a Walk on the Wild Side. He's sort of like Bob Dylan, but like the evil Bob Dylan, where he talks his lines. And I think that works for, My Name is Mock, because he basically talks his lines. He doesn't sing it, which makes it more terrifying.
I think you're right. It's really, he spits it out, right?
It's like when the horror character walks after you and doesn't run. It's kind of like that kind of vibe,
He's perfect. He's just the way that he speaks. But what I was going to say is, since rock and roll is a musical,
Yeah.
did you always envision it to be a classic musical, to be a musical in terms of the genre?
Yeah, but not classical. So because just the very fact that we had all these musical artists writing their own pieces for a singular story took it out of any class. And like, I'm not sure anybody's ever done it that way, right? Done a
I think
musical.
it's brilliant. It works, but we would have never known that it was from different artists. But I think that's really kick-ass and really original to have the artist who are voicing the characters or singing the characters write the songs for them, because they're more emotionally invested in it then.
That was the thinking. And also we thought it would be exciting. It was look, animation is a collaborative art form, filmmaking is a collaborative art form. And having the artists contribute that way, in a way, uh, you know, made this much more of an experimental musical than it would otherwise have been. If we'd had one composer and everybody came in and sang their part. Because yeah, when you listen to them singing, they're all very emotionally engaged. Like Cheap Trick, Robin from Cheap Trick is like singing those songs as if he really, he's feeling it, right? And same thing with every one of the other artists.
I know this is a hard question, and it might be really out of left field, but since we love underground, underappreciated musicals, and you obviously have such a deep connection with music and animation, were there any sort of underground cult musicals that inspired you, that you thought about and carried with you, that sort of inspired the inception of rock and roll?
Yeah, I think Rocky Horror Picture Show was an impact for us, right? It was a big musical and different, and again, interesting. And an interesting fact, I picked up the rights at Nelvana to do an animated series based upon Rocky Horror and had a chance to meet with Richard O'Brien, who created it. And that was great. Unfortunately, it was ahead of its time. Like it did not sell in that era, right? It was a little out there, but
Oh
we
man,
thought it would make a great show. Yeah.
It would
I
have
want
made a brilliant TV series.
What do you
It
think
was
about
after,
reviving that idea?
to do it now.
well, I'd have to go back again to, so the rights are held by,
Disney.
no. Disney for Rocky Horror? No.
Yeah, they owned the.
Movie. They own the movie, but they don't own the
Oh,
rights.
yeah.
So the
Oh,
rights to Rocky Horror are with Lou Adler. So Lou Adler is a famous person in the music industry.
Hmm.
He produced Mamas and Papas. He produced Carole King, like all
Yeah.
her like Tapestry, like big stuff. And he ran a bar on Sunset Strip. I think it was the Rainbow on Sunset Strip. And you know, we got the rights through him. I had to meet with Richard to sort of get his creative input. And then we developed it. We did a great development on it that just didn't go, but it was a good try.
It was based on the Rocky Horror Show, so the stage show that.
Yeah, that was the takeoff point for the series.
That's incredible. And we're not going to harp on that, but you sort of blew our minds. And I'll ask my other question. Were there any ideas about what the pilot episode would look like in your head?
You know, I haven't been able to find the old script. We developed a script and we developed the look. We had a great look. We had a great script, and we were focused on the sci-fi fantasy aspect of it.
I love that because that sometimes is muted and it's sometimes overlooked, the fantasy at the sci-fi inspiration in
Yeah,
Rocky Horror. You know, it's all about, I mean, science fiction double feature is all about the science fiction films that inspired Richard. But what I
yeah.
was gonna say is, I always, when I'm
Funny,
talking about, pardon?
funny moment when I met with Richard O'Brien. He came dressed in a three-piece suit. This was in London, and he was dressed very conservatively, not like what I expected the, author and, genius behind Rocky Horror to show. But back to you.
I mean, he's a chameleon, definitely. What I was gonna say is, when we usually talk about this, I bring up rock and roll all the time in real life and all the time on our podcast when we're talking about stuff because rock and roll, Shock Treatment, which is a sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Phantom of the Paradise, they all seem to have a common thread that, and it might be more deep than, I mean, it might be more deep than it was originally intended, but I feel like those three cult musicals try to warn us about the dangers of, Mary alluded to capitalism, but I think the record industry as well, because I think what's so brilliant about rock and roll, like Shock Treatment and like Phantom of the Paradise, is that it sort of has, boy meets girl, but also it has like regular all American or all Canadian or all eccentric kids who are sort of duped into the guise and the false narrative of fame and the Hollywood dream. When I love that because it sort of paints these figures like Mock and Paul Williams as Swan and Farley Flavors from Shock Treatment as the villains, and they're usually um, moguls, media moguls, or music moguls. And I think it's really awesome that those musicals all sort of share the same theme to sort of warn us that, all that glitters isn't gold. I don't know. I've always found rock and roll to be very deep in that aspect.
Hmm.
So I think that makes sense to me in the context of the period of, if you think 70s, 80s. So some of those movies were made in the 70s, and some of those series were, done in the 80s. And in that period, people were becoming aware of the fact that a lot of young people who became famous and made a ton of money in rock and roll never kept that money, never got it, never went to them. They were basically victims of the way the business was set up. And so those were stories that were around, right? And we had worked one of our early projects, and a number of them were with John Sebastian, and he had written a lot of number one hits. Summer in the City, Do You Believe in Magic? Well, probably about 5 or 6 major hits, right? And that money all went to the record company and didn't find its way to him and the band members. They got some of it, like they got what fell off the truck. But at the end of it, they were basically finding themselves, without a lot of money. So that when he did his next hit, which was Welcome Back for the TV show Welcome Back, Kotter, he kept the publishing. He made the money. He had learned his lesson. So a lot of these people learned their lessons along the way. And if you had a long enough career, you could make up for the fact that you were being ripped off when you were starting. But that was, common knowledge, and we knew a lot of people who were in that situation.
And the thing is, we always say that cult musicals are much deeper than people realize. And I feel like we always say that cult musicals try to teach us about life and they try to warn us about things before it happens. And I
Yeah.
think that's really awesome that rock and roll, I don't want to say revealed, maybe revealed, but also warned that all that glitters isn't gold. And I think it was brilliant. And to do it with the sort of hybrid animals post-apocalyptic was really a brilliant idea as well. It's very Watership Down. It's very sort of sci-fi, and I think it's brilliant. And I think it all works together. And I think that's why it's so beloved. And I think that's why people look back at it and reevaluate it now. As you know, we're from the States, and so the version that was released to us was edited due to violence or etc. So
Really?
yeah, there's two different versions of rock and roll. There's the US version and the Canadian version.
Yeah, but they're not, I'm not sure they're edited for that. Here's what happened. There's two things. There's a version with the voice of Omar being
Mhm.
done by Paul Lamont, who was one of the actors in American Graffiti. And the Canadian version has the Canadian actor who did it. I can't remember who it was, but we had a different actor. And essentially, the studio liked the Paul Lamont version. So the movie was released in the States by MGM UA. And I don't think they edited it for violence. There really is not a lot of violence in it. But the other change was titles. There was a period where they liked the title Ring of Power versus Rock and Roll. And so those are the two differences that I'm aware of in the two versions. Otherwise, it's the same show.
There's there is a fan cut online of some of the things that were removed for the American version. I'll have to send it to you. So if
That's
I'm
but maybe it was a version on TV or, versus,
something.
yeah, because on video, it's the same version, right? It's not the edited version. But eventually, I think it's pretty much the same movie as far as I know. But I'll look forward to your sending me the list of
A
edits.
fan restoration. Which I'm glad that it's getting a Blu-ray release, it's gotten a Blu-ray release, etc., because people are seeing it. But what I was gonna ask before I handed over to Marion Hades was when did you've got a lot of adulation for Nelvana, which you should because it's an incredible studio, but when did you start seeing the adulation or the reevaluation of or the discovery of rock and roll by people, by fans on the internet?
Well, we had to wait for the internet. So, it was post mid 90s. I'd say it's in the last 15 years. So before that, it was being discovered kind of with people discovering the DVDs, right? And discovering it on pay TV where it would play on Showtime or another player. Um, but essentially, there's nothing like the net to sort of create what's called the long tail of interest, right?
I remember a rock and roll fan website in 2005 when I was 15. I
Yeah.
remember, and they had like backgrounds on it. And they had like GIFs and they had like animated pictures, and they were really devoted to rock and roll. And I wonder if that's still on the internet. Mary or Hades?
The cartoon, the Uncle Mikey, was it?
Yeah.
The Uncle Mikey cartoon, was that like Monty Python inspired? Like the stunt?
Possibly. So Clive Smith, the director, was very Monty Python inspired. He was a British kid who grew up around Spike Mulligan and what inspired the Python Boys, and had that British sense of humor. But no, I think Uncle Mikey was either making fun of me.
Oh my God. Really?
Yeah, we would all make fun of each other in different things. There was a patchwork of writing in rock and roll, a patchwork of different styles at times, and Uncle Mikey is that different style, right? Again, that was an experimental thing to do, and a chance for some of the studio kids to make fun of the execs.
It's brilliant. It's a brilliant way to do that.
And we were happy. Like we're not, I was happy to be lampooned if it was me. I'm not sure. I just assumed it was me.
Hades.
Hmm. You've answered all my other questions that I had, about like where was a lot of the inspiration done from, like in Rocky Horror was the answer for that one. Um, I guess I'm gonna steal one of Mary Puffins's famous uh questions. Sorry. What is your favorite like bloopers or like funny things that happened on set or during
Well,
animation?
I shared with you, which was the story with Lou Reed threatening to send the director back in pieces in a
Hmm.
box. Uh, you know, the it wasn't so much bloopers, but when we were working with these different artists, the Cheap Trick people were always on tour. Debbie, Harry, and Chris Stein, who wrote the songs together and who were, the backbone of Blondie, they weren't touring so much at that point, but she was working on her solo record, which was a
Mm.
Debbie Harry record, and was getting, the artwork for the cover, which was an incredible cover, was done by the guy who did Alien, whose name escapes me, who just died in the last year.
Hmm.
Famous German artist or Swiss artist, actually. And, you know, when I was working with her and recording with her in New York, it was around the time that John Lennon got shot. And so celebrity, and she was, she couldn't walk down the street without everybody like knowing who she was. Like she was on billboards and posters, and she was the it girl of the moment. And, Warhol put her on the cover of Interview, once every 4 months or whatever. So she was always visible. And, she was afraid to go for a walk outside her home in New York because celebrities were concerned that, there were other crazy fans that would copycat. So she decided she had to go for a walk. She was getting stir crazy, and we were working on the song. And so Chris Stein and I went on one side of her, each on a side of her, and walked down the street. She put her coat up, and she put her, a kerchief on her head, and she put big sunglasses on so you couldn't see anything of her, but you knew immediately this was a celebrity trying not to be seen.
That's cute.
I love that. It's like, don't look at me. Be really obvious.
But, it was a scary time. It was like,
Yeah.
didn't know how to behave in terms of, because people weren't going gunning for celebrities that often. I guess Andy Warhol got shot, right, in his
Yeah.
back. But that was around the same time. Like it was just maybe a year or two earlier. So, you know, it's a crazy period in the US.
I only have two questions, and the first one's almost impossible. But was there ever any idea in your mind of what a continuation would look like in the film? Like what other things Omar and Angel would have to conquer or go through? Was there ever an idea?
No, because when the movie didn't succeed in the box office, that was kind of it for that storyline, right? You weren't going to go down that route. We had to work our way out of that debt, right?
Yeah,
So it takes success to sort of really imagine what a continuation of a story is like.
that's fair. So millennials like ourselves really ache and yearn for the return of traditional animation. I mean, it's traditional animation is still present on TV at the moment, but I'm sure there's still some digital input or some 3D animation involved with the 2D animation. But I mean, with the millennial movement to really hope and pray and want traditional animation, do you ever see there being a return to form with 2D animation, sort of having like a resurrection?
Well, I think 2D animation still has its place, in part because of the success of Japanese anime, right? And so we just did a show a few years ago at my last studio, which was called WoW, which had a division called Frederator. And the show was called Castlevania,
Oh my God, yes.
and
Oh,
so that's all 2D animation, and that's a hit show, right? So there's a lot of hit shows. We also did a show called Bee and Puppy Cat in that studio, and that's 2D
oh,
animation.
oh my God. I'm sorry. I ran across it accidentally one, like just whatever, and I started and I couldn't stop. It was absolutely brilliant. I love that show. Oh my God.
It's so bizarre. I love that one
Fun.
too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Castlevania. Okay, like
yeah.
as any goth individual, of course, Castlevania will become my personality for a brief period of time. So we love Castlevania here.
Yeah. And Bee and Puppy Cat, you know that
Oh
show?
yeah, we love being Puppy Cat too.
So that's the last show I produced was Bee and Puppy Cat.
Is there gonna be more? No, it's done now, right? There's nothing.
Done for now. It doesn't mean there won't be some in the future. There is a digital store with product, and it's being sold in. Trying to think of the name of the chain. Name a popular teen-oriented chain. That's
Claire's
no,
Hot
no.
Topic.
Yeah,
Spencer.
Buffalo.
I think it's Hot Topic.
Yeah.
They
Ooh.
have Bee and Puppy Cat.
I want that girl's life, okay? I want to just make money, go into another dimension, do an odd job real quick, and be fine. Like,
Get
yeah,
animated.
yeah.
Yeah, that too. Animated. I want to be Puppy
That'd be,
Cat.
I
Fuck.
want
I love
to.
So one thing we haven't mentioned is my book, Animation
Yes.
Nation. So I want to do a plug for Animation
Yes, I
Nation.
was going to get to
Oh,
that was the final thing because we're really excited to hear about it, and it's got a beautiful, beautiful cover. So, do you cover a lot of these things in your new book, and could you tell us about it?
sure. So Animation Nation covers the stories of how I got into the film industry, starting as an experimental filmmaker, how I cut classes in high school to go to a underground film festival, and then started making underground films myself, and went down to the Bowery in New York and showed my films to the underground filmmaking community. And that I kept doing that and made, an experimental feature, Voulez-Vous, Coucher avec God with Tuli Kupferberg. And then went into the professional business, building Nelvana and doing all the shows that we've talked about and more, right? Because we did have a lot of great titles that we did and brands. And then when I sold Nelvana with my partners to a broadcaster, Chorus, I then started another company called Cookie Jar, where we did Johnny Test and we did um, Caillou and Arthur and a lot of great shows, and a musical called Doodle Bobs. I don't know if any of you remember Doodle Bobs. So, Get on the Bus was the big Doodle Bobs theme song. And then I sold that company and merged it in with a company called Wild Brain, where we became a big YouTube player. And then I left and started another company called Wow, where I put together Frederator, who were famous for Adventure Time and Fairly Odd Parents. And I,
Oh,
and
Adventure
I
Time
hit,
is my jam.
Oh
Okay,
my
I love
God.
Very Odd Parents from when I was a kid. Like that came on right when I was a kid, and I was so into it.
yeah,
And Adventure Time, my kids are obsessed. They love it. I am
Yeah.
too, but
We co-produced Fairly Odd Parents with Frederator for Nickelodeon and at Nelvana. So in any case, at Frederator, we did Castlevania and Bean Puppy Cat, which we talked about, and Bravest Warriors and lots of great stuff. And then I ended up selling that company and now focused on talking about my book and looking at the next thing to do.
So I guess because you're so caught up in creating these great properties. Everything that we've talked about, everything you mentioned, and that's why we're really excited to plug your book and to read it, is that the things that you created and things you produce and co-produce, they mean so much to people of my age and younger and older. And it's so iconic, and it just means these properties mean so much to us. And we want to thank you for just having the vision and the inspiration to leave such a lasting impact on so many people's lives.
Well, I want to thank you for, keeping these properties alive in everybody's minds because some of these shows we made like 40, 45 years ago.
And they're so iconic and they're great and they mean so much to people, and you're continuing to do it. And thank you
That's
for
the fun.
sharing your story in print, because I think that's really important to see for people who may be um, struggling artists or people who may be hopeful that they can become an animator and artist. It's great to see someone who's done such iconic things of all of our childhoods and put it down on print for people to know that it's not impossible, that it is possible.
Speaking to that young audience out there that, wants to do great creative things, we started with no money. We bootstrapped, Nelvana with $10 between three partners. And so that's, it can be done. And the second thing is there's never been a better time to be a young animation artist or film artist than now because if, to do anything, we had to sell it to a network. We had to get a network to finance it or a studio, a movie studio, right? You had to get somebody behind you to give you the money to make these projects. Today, you have the tools to do these things, whether it's with your iPhone or whether it's with, software that you get for free online. But you can do cartoons, you can do films and put them on YouTube. There's nobody who you have to sell it to. You just put it on the air. If you reach a big audience because you've done a great job of making, something that's valuable to people to watch, you can build an audience, you can build a brand, you can get monetization, get money for what you do. And then you can turn around and make movies with it or sell it to Netflix or whatever. And Being Puppy Cat actually started as a YouTube short, as did Bravest Warriors. And there's a lot of examples, like Coco Melon started on YouTube and became a Netflix series. There's this new show out of Australia that's become a big hit and is going to Netflix off of YouTube. Title that I can never remember, but it's something Bizarro Circus, Digital Circus.
oh, I think I know what you're talking about. I don't remember it either, but Bizarro Digital Circus rings a
How about
bell.
that? Yeah. So basically, there's never been a better time to be beginning your career. And, I'm envious of the next generation. So when I'm doing new things now, I'm thinking, how do I build it off YouTube?
Mhm.
Well, you laid the groundwork. You and the animation greats laid the groundwork, and we're so inspired. And I'm glad that you're doing new things, and we're still longing for maybe a return to film for 2D animation. I think that would be great to have a new 2D animated film in theaters or on streaming.
For
Be
sure,
so
that'll
cool.
happen. Everything comes around.
But thank you so much, Michael. And where can we get your book, and when will it come out?
Well, it's out and you can get it through Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. Um, it's a great way to get it because it's easy, right?
Thank you so much. This has been incredible. It's been like a walk down memory lane for all of us. And we learned a lot, like the Rocky Horror animated show, which would have been genius.
Would have been fun.
Yeah, oh my God.
Thank you
But
so
and
much.
now I'm going to follow up on it again. I did follow up, by the way, like about 4 or 5 years ago, but Lou Adler was doing something else with it and wasn't interested in doing it. So I'll have to go back and see if he's interested again.
What's the 50th anniversary? So
Yeah.
He's counting.
Anniversaries are big.
Yeah, they are.
Mhm.
All
but
right.
at
Great
least
to meet you all.